Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where we talk about things important to your soul. As always, we ask you to like us, leave comments, subscribe. All of that helps keep us on the air. Maybe even support us on Patreon. And just a final note, there's still a little room in the Bali trip. If you're interested, just go to our website, yourspiritualjourneypodcast.com. Click on the tab that says Bali, and all the information is there. So today's guest is someone who I've wanted to track down for quite a while because she's been referred to me by a number of past guests as somebody I should really have on this program. Her name is Sara Sachs, and she's an international medium based in Pittsburgh. She holds a BA degree in drama at Syracuse University, and it's a background that she attributes to her strong presence in her public appearances and demonstrations. Her spiritual education and mediumship took place at Lilydale, New York, the Arthur Findlay College in England, and the Zwanenhof Spiritual Center in the Netherlands. She travels extensively doing sittings, demonstrations, and teaching workshops. Her work has put her in demand for radio and television appearances. She enjoys serving spirit by giving inspirational talks and messages at Spiritualist Churches and outdoor message services in Lilydale, New York in the summer. She has done readings, gallery messages, and taught workshops locally at Journeys of Life, Elemental Magic, and presently at the Christine Frichard Gallery. You may recall that Christine was recently on this program. You can find her on Facebook, Instagram, and she has her Sara Sachs Medium on the Go channel on YouTube, where she uses tarot to see how current events are affecting our spiritual paths. So with that, Sara, as you know, I'd like you to talk about your spiritual journey from childhood until now, and then we'll get into some questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show today. Okay, I guess as most mediums and other light workers have told you, it begins early in childhood, but we're not aware that that's exactly what it is. And my earlier memories are my mother telling my father, "Oh, Sarah's talking to her imaginary friend again. Isn't that cute?" Which meant that I was talking to spirit. And when my parents, in their early married days back in Pittsburgh, when my father got out of the Army, we lived on Northumberland Street, just down the road from the Homewood Cemetery. And my mother, that was sort of like the closest thing to a park. So my mother used to wheel my carriage into the cemetery, and I always said, well, that's probably where I got my first contact with the spirit world. But there were some memorable things. I think one of the early ones is that when I was 11 years old, I had a schoolmate, and there were a whole bunch of us that used to hang out together, and she started getting very ill, and as it turned out, she had leukemia, and I was out of school because of a migraine headache for the week, and I almost crossed paths with her at Children's Hospital, but I was at home sick, really sick for a few days, only to hear that she had passed away. And I was not in school when that was announced, but I started asking everybody I knew and got all kinds of different answers, like, what happens after we die? Because I somehow felt like that just couldn't quite be the end. So as it turned out, I had dreams, which I was to later learn that were really what they call visitations. And the one thing we used to like to do is to play jump rope with, two people holding the rope, and doing all kinds of stuff. So in my dreams, it was kind of a cloudy day, and she would always join us. And I had this dream a few times, and finally she said, I've got to say goodbye now. I've got to go. And so and so she left, and I never had the dream again. But I even to this day, in the autumn, I think it was in sometime maybe in November, when it gets around the anniversary of her death, I do feel her presence around me. And I wrote an essay when I was a freshman at Kent State University. It was like, what am I going to write at 3 o'clock in the morning? And I just dashed that off. And the grad student that was teaching the class was so moved by it, she read it to the class. And I realized later that I was just in an altered state, re-experiencing it. And I just dashed it down and made a few spelling corrections and handed it in. And so, but one of the more memorable things as a child was we went on a big, I think it was in the 6th grade. Yeah, in the 6th grade, we went on a big field trip and went to Washington, D.C. And on the way back, we stopped at Gettysburg. And I'm sure that if you have other mediums on your show that have been there are a lot of us that say that that was a really memorable thing. So then this will date me. That was a time when they still had that tower where you could look down on the battlefields, but they don't have it anymore. So I remember just going to the top of it with my friends, and I think we had learned about Pickett's charge or something like that. And I got up there, and just for a minute, I could smell the smoke from the cannons. I could see dead bodies around and the wounded for very briefly, and then it left. And it's interesting because a friend of mine who lives in the Catskills told me that when he was a kid in New York City, his parents dragged him there, and he had a similar experience, and so have other people. So it's been going to places like that I just kind of attributed to my imagination, but that was a very mediumistic, because I got the sight, and the smell, and I'll never forget the smell of that gunpowder. But in high school, a very memorable one was I was in high school when President Kennedy got assassinated, and we found out about it just before we were to go to Friday assembly. I guess we did entertainment and stuff, and then we would go home. But they were going to close the school early. So we had a very tall, lanky principal who just, we all assembled, and he gave a brief announcement. And when I looked at him, and this is what I was later to learn in physical mediumship, that this transfigurization. And as he stood there, I felt as though he was turning into Abraham Lincoln. All of a sudden, another assassinated president. And I thought, well, I guess that's just my very vivid imagination going. So some people may have attributed this to maybe my not wanting to realize that this was mediumship. And I did have a drinking problem for a number of years, and got sober. And so I was an atheist for a number of years, and then by making a trip to Lilydale in 2004, that started to dissipate, because I was told in what they call a development circle that I did have the abilities, and it just really took off from there. But there were other incidents with dreams of prophetic dreams of family things and that sort of thing, that I realized that something was going on. So when I discovered this, I think I was coming up on 15 years of sobriety. And I've also seen a lot. See, this is the thing that doesn't make us so really special or unique, but there are a lot of recovering people in this kind of a spiritual community. Some of them are public figures as well, who've have been very open and honest about that sort of thing. So I look at it as instead of like, oh, I came into my abilities, it's sort of like I stopped fighting it. And
Yeah.
that's what really happened. But I don't think my story is all that different from a lot of other people who have discovered their ability. So that's when I started taking the classes, going to circles, joining the Spiritualist Church. And I think it was the Buddhist monks that where the atheism slipped when it was, they pretty much said, you don't have to believe in the big guy in the sky necessarily, that it is something, it's a force within all of us that we have, a force of divinity that we have. And the interesting thing is I found out that so I think the British are a little bit more open about this than Americans, but when I went to the Arthur Findlay School, I found out that there were people that went through their atheist years, including one of the tutors who is one of the more prominent mediums in the UK.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much my journey.
Well, what was it that made you decide on the Arthur Findlay School? Did somebody recommend it to you?
Yes, there is a teacher who is unfortunately, she passed away a few years ago. There was a teacher by the name of Janet Nohavik from New Jersey, and she had been a Roman Catholic nun for 16 years. And she turned out to be one of the more skilled evidential mediums, and I took her classes. So she started talking about that. Now, it took about 6 years after studying with her before I went to the school, but it was very transformative. I always came out a different person than I went in.
Yeah. So no regrets about going there at all.
Oh, no. I think I got a lot of things out of it that I probably wouldn't have in the States. It's really, from interviewing people from other countries that there's certain cultural things that we benefit from that we may not get here, and I think vice versa as well.
Well, you also studied in the Netherlands, so how did that come about?
It came about because a friend of mine from Ohio, Susan Avere, who's a medium and a spiritual artist, you may want to get in touch with her. She had talked about the Zwanenhof, and then one of my tutors at Arthur Findlay was a Dutch woman with a very big background in psychology, and I think she was one of the center leaders. So between her and Susan, I wanted to give that a try and took a couple of one was on platform mediumship and the other was a spiritual development class 7 years ago.
Okay, so a medium is someone who can communicate with people who have passed over the veil. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So you learn how to do that, and then you're done, right? Why do you need more education, and what else are you learning beside how to do what you already know how to do?
I found and this is another thing where my education in college benefited, but the first tutor I had there, Colin Bates, the first day I had class with him, I was saying, my goodness, that like his thing with blending with spirit and everything, that's so much like what I learned in acting class. It's very, very similar. Only you might take on a fictional person where you take on a real person in mediumship. And it's just how, certain little techniques and how you can connect, that sort of thing. But the one thing that they teach that's very important is the ethics. And that might be a little bit skimmed from stuff I've heard in some of the churches and different things here. There's some things with that are kind of skipped and not taken as seriously here as they are over there. And they base it on a law they have in the UK, and that's kind of a changing thing too. So,
So can you give an example
Yes.
of where that would be important?
Okay, we do not diagnose or prescribe or give legal advice. And, and this is the big no-no. We don't tell someone when they're going to die, when their dog's going to die, when their mother's going to die. That is a big no-no. And where we could get sued for that sort of thing here, you can get thrown in the clink in the
Yeah.
UK for that kind of stuff. So there are other, and it can get very nuanced at times. Like there's certain things that you can say in a private sitting where you wouldn't dare to do in
Yeah.
public mediumship. So
Uh-huh.
and sometimes that line can get very fuzzy with that. And as I've been told by various tutors and chair people at Lilydale, that,
Yeah.
oh, Sarah, you went a little bit too personal. That was
Yeah.
like 8 years ago, and I really learned to pull back in that.
Yeah. So even in a private sitting, then are there lines that you don't cross? Like even if you know about something that you just make a decision, no, I'm not going to share that. And when you make that decision, does the person who you're channeling say, but I want you to tell them?
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting question because this goes back to way in the beginning where I intuitively knew the line I wasn't supposed to cross, and this goes back a long time, maybe about 20 years ago at the McKeesport Spiritualist Church, where I think the first Sunday of the month we did a fundraising thing where we gave readings to people to raise money for the church. They were short readings. So I was sitting with this woman, and I was starting to trying to bring people through, and she wasn't quite connecting. And all of a sudden, it hit me that she had been abused by her father. And I thought, whoa, that you don't go. I didn't need I didn't need
Yeah.
Arthur Findlay to tell me that you don't go there. And I pretty much said to her, "You seem to have blocked out a lot of memories from your childhood are blocked out." And she said, "Yes, you're right." And so I know that's a big
Mhm.
sign. So I thought, we'll leave it at there. And all of a sudden I said to her, "There was a older lady down the street that was very kind to you." She said, "That I remember." And how she would stop after school, and the woman gave her milk and cookies and kind of looked after her. And from some books, Alice Miller books I read, that she had her enlightened witness, if you know what I mean. The one person that she could go to, and I thought, I think I'll leave it at that I brought through someone that was kind to her. But I always, and also if, I bring through, say, like someone's father, uncle, and they're starting to get a little creepy, and the sitter would say, I don't think I want to hear from him. And I said, okay, moving right along. Goodbye, moving right along. So that's a biggie
Yeah.
that's very difficult. And it depends on the sitter, too.
Yeah.
Some things you do, some things you don't.
Because I would imagine some of those spirits would want forgiveness and come through and look for forgiveness.
Well, the thing is that one thinks that as soon as people cross over, they just automatically get enlightened, and that's not the case. They go through a process which is called like the evaluation, where they meet the people that they have harmed, and they kind of like don't really move on until that's settled. And I always joke and say, Hitler's still there. They're not done with it. You know what I mean? They're
Yeah.
not done with him yet, and a few other people. But it's they have to go through that, and sometimes they're so dysfunctional and damaged that it could take many years for that to happen. So, and I'll often say, unfortunately, his ego is saying that he doesn't feel as though he needs to be forgiven, and they understand. And then I said, okay, moving right along, we're going to send him away
Yeah.
because he hasn't learned his lesson yet from the past lifetime.
Yeah. So you're describing, and I'm reading into this, that on the other side there are levels of ascension or different levels where, after you die, you would go to one of those levels, and based on what you've learned in this lifetime or how you acted in this lifetime.
I pretty much keep it simple because there are things we don't really know.
Hmm.
I think that once you get past that point, you just move on. You just
Yeah.
move on to the other world, so to speak. But I would say that with normal people we've all made our share of mistakes without really killing massive amounts of people, this sort of thing. I don't think that takes too long, and then
Mhm.
we move along and join other loved ones and pets and things
Yeah.
like that. You know,
So speaking of pets, have you done any work with pets and with animals?
they come through. Some people say, "Oh, I'm an animal, communicator,"
Mhm.
and they focus on that. With the training I've gotten, what I do, what works for me, because different things work for different people, pets usually come in with the dearly departed. And a lot of times when people are in hospice and they're getting ready to pass, and people are they see their spirit people waiting to help them
Mhm.
cross over. There's usually a dog or a cat or some kind of an animal that's waiting, and those are usually the one that leads them into the light. Now, sometimes I get details, sometimes I don't get that many.
Yeah.
It just depends.
So do you get many requests to work with people in a hospice?
No, I haven't yet, but I have worked with. I've gotten. This is interesting. I've done readings for people that have been hospice nurses or worked in
Oh,
hospice centers, and
okay.
the people that they have been with at the end, they come through, and some of them are incredibly interesting people. I mean, I've had Holocaust survivors and gangsters and all kinds of different people that come through with the hospice workers.
Yeah. So I imagine you've had uh, quite a number of interesting cases and situations. Have you ever thought of putting together a book about all this?
Well, you're like quite a long number of people that have been nagging me to do this. So it's something that I guess I should make the commitment on the air. That's something that I will be starting to work on in this year,
Yeah.
at least to get started, because I've got a couple of them in my head
Mhm.
that I just need to put down on
Yeah.
paper.
So in the past, we've worked with the concept of a psychic versus a medium, and some mediums are both mediums and psychics. Some psychics are not mediums, but just focus on the psychic piece. Where would you fit on a range of psychic versus medium totally?
Well, there's this old saying, you probably heard it a million times. It's like every medium is a psychic, but not every psychic is a medium.
Mhm.
And so I consider, in fact, the very first exercise that we did at Arthur Findlay with Colin, he just said, we're going to do psychic readings first because that's very necessary to begin with. But I would say that sometimes it does begin on the psychic level and it goes into the mediumship. But it's almost like what came first, the chicken or the egg. So I would say it's pretty. I think that the ideal thing is pretty much it's an even thing, because some people will say enough with the dead people. I've said
Yeah.
everything I've got to say, and I just want to know is my marriage going to go down the toilet, or that sort of thing,
Hmm.
or the job. And so we just do strictly psychic. And someone says, you know, this is going to, someone booked me for a 2-hour reading. I don't know how that's possible. But she had so many people on the other side, it was almost like 2 hours wasn't enough. So it
Uh,
really depends on the client and it is kind of a different energy. And one of my tutors said, "Oh, you don't ever do a psychic reading and a mediumship reading in the same sitting," but that turns out to be not practical because people
Yeah.
like both. So it's like I compare it to do the mediumship first, and then when we go into the psychic, I said it's kind of like shifting gears on a semi. For the energy, it's like, "Mwah," and then you go. And sometimes it's a little bit of a easier transition. Just
Yeah.
depends.
Yeah. So having psychic abilities, uh, how does that manifest itself in the everyday? For instance, do you feel energy from people? Uh, you know, light energy, dark energy, heaviness, lightness. Uh, how? I'm just thinking. I recently met you at a party, and I wondered if uh, you can turn on psychic abilities and get a sense of the room and the people, or you just want to shut them down and not have that kind of energy coming and going with yourself.
Yeah, because we can't keep it flipped on all the time. It's just it would just make you crazy,
Right. Yeah.
actually. But in non-reading situations, maybe if I'm going to a party, say, and I don't feel comfortable. I'm always that comfortable in social situations. I might just flip it on and read the room and say, okay, and then I flip it off.
Yeah.
Now, things that this was another thing that I didn't realize that this was what I was doing, but when I lived in New York City and I would take the subway at night and walk home, it was flipped on just to, really
Sure.
the whether both places. It was like a couple of like a 10-minute walk back from the subway to where I lived, and it was flipped on big time to see danger lurking. And one time I was walking up or getting off at 72nd Street on the west side, and this was at 5 in the afternoon in the summer, and it was light, and I was walking up, I think I was walking up Broadway, and just before I hit 73rd Street, I felt something behind me, and I turned around, and this guy dressed in a business suit was going for the purse on my shoulder bag, and he looked back like that.
Yeah.
So that's in situations when you're not doing a reading, that's when you have it turned on, whether you know, and sometimes it's like whether you know it or not.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because some people would just say, well, was my intuition, it was,
Yes, and that's what it is, because I think
know,
we all have it. I think everybody, to a certain degree, has it. It's really interesting because I have a Puerto Rican friend who has some, he would be a good one for you to interview, too. He has some Santeria, if you know what that is. It's kind of it's an Afro-Caribbean spiritual belief that has some voodoo roots, but not the dark stuff. And so he's got that in his family, and he's a tarot reader. And when he was growing up in Puerto Rico, he did realize he had some mediumistic abilities, and then he said, "No, thank you." So he just shut them down, and he just uses his psychic abilities and the Santeria, and that's it.
yeah.
So some people will have both, but they may reject the mediumship, which is fine. That that works for them.
Yeah. So, in your experience, is there one situation or one sit that stands out for you as this was really powerful? This was something that the world should know about?
Well, I could say there could be quite a few of them and you never know, because some people have come up to me and said, "Oh, that reading changed my life," and I can't for the life of me remember the reading.
Yeah.
But
So you don't record these?
I let people record. I don't record them myself because I'm not going. I don't even listen to ones that I got when I got readings from mediums in Lilydale that recorded them. Some of them are over 20 years old that I haven't listened to yet. Maybe I will someday. But so let's see. Any that's I think a lot of it is for people healing over a great loss. And I guess one that comes to mind is a woman whose husband, I've had a couple of those, who was a singer, but this is the one whose husband was like a nightclub type of singer. And I said, I don't know why I want to talk about Frank Sinatra. And she was saying that, I think she was saying that they had met him or something, that it was like that it was a big impact on this person's life. And I was telling her that, well, they're together, and that he's letting him know that, look, we're both okay, because she was very worried about it. And a lot of times it can be something as simple as that.
Mm.
And another showbiz, I guess maybe it's my theater background. One of my show business readings was, I think it was at Journeys years ago, when I was when I was doing a reading on a young woman who used to be she was a gypsy hoofer on Broadway. She danced in a lot of choruses, and her life took a different turn. And all of a sudden I said, I don't know why, I want to talk about Gregory Hines, who was a great dancer who passed.
Sure.
She burst into tears and said she worked with him and she remembered him very much, and she was so glad that I brought him up. For some reason, that sometimes they know more than I do, that she found it incredibly moving. So there's one of those things that a lot of times I remember, but sometimes I don't. And she spoke at an organization that used to be in Pittsburgh called Sight Night. This was maybe this was quite a while ago, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And I just I went up to her after the talk, and I mentioned Gregory Hines. She said, you know, you did a reading on me at Journeys and you mentioned him, and I burst into tears because it was, I think it was a big sadness in that world when he passed away, because I think he was kind of like a mentor to her.
Yeah.
And I'd almost forgotten until she reminded me about that. But sometimes things are like, oh, that's cool that they knew that person, but it has a much deeper meaning to them than it does. It's sort of like I just give the message. It's really none of my business, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah. No, I've had a few of the Excite Night people on the show.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm familiar with it. And that morphed into another organization.
Yes, and that's PSI, and that is, the funny thing, but the advantage of those organizations, a lot of times I've seen spiritualist churches get into these big wars and they disband. It's a lot of ego stuff, but with Sight Night and PSI, what happened was, like, they did all that they could do, no harm, and it's time to disband it, and so they lived their natural life, and then they just went on, and nobody felt bad, and we still get together and everything. But that's one of the nicer things about those. There were no fights or anything or egos. It was like, well, what else can we do? I don't know. We've done everything we can do, so time to let it go, and we'll wait until the next one comes along. Yeah.
Yeah, Chi Rivera was one of the people who was on the show early on, and I've had her on a couple times, and I'd like to get Kathy on the show.
Oh, Kathy, yes, yeah. Yeah, Chi and I, we used to share booths together at fairs about 13 years ago, and I see her from time to time. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Kathy, if you're listening,
right? Yes, Kathy.
This is my 5th invitation to you to come on the show. We've crossed paths a number of times. We've discussed it. She said, "Yeah, I'm going to do that," and then she's just so busy all the time.
I guess just keep
Yeah.
Yeah, she's got grandchildren and all kinds of stuff
Yeah.
going on in her life. Yeah.
So I want to take you back to Homewood Cemetery just because uh, that's near and dear to my heart because I grew up near Homewood Cemetery and used to sneak through the bars and we'd play football around around the
It is like a
tombstones.
park.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
uh, yeah, I lived on a very small street called Worth Street near Kinsman and Wilkins. Uh, but anyway, your mention of Homewood Cemetery really took me back to those days of youth. So I'm curious about your parents and your upbringing spiritually. Uh, did you practice your faith together?
Well, the
And how
interesting
did
thing is
all
that
that work?
I come from a mixed marriage. And my
Okay.
father is Jewish, and my mother was kind of like a non-denominational. She grew up in the Chautauqua area, and they just went to church,
Mm,
that kind of thing. So when they got married, it was decided that that the kids would be brought up Jewish. My mother didn't convert, but she really didn't practice her
yeah.
religion of origin. Never knew her to go to church. I think I heard she went to church like once since she married. But at any rate, so we were brought up, Reform Judaism at Road of Shalom
Hmm.
Temple, and which is pretty not that indoctrinating. It's not the strict laws and the kosher and all this sort of stuff. So
Yeah.
they were pretty kind of like nice and loose and easy with
Hmm.
us. It didn't feel like terribly indoctrinated. And my mother was the one that she joined the sisterhood at Temple, and she took us to our first thing to meet the rabbi and all this. It was a big ceremony, that kind of thing. But my father wasn't all that religious.
Hmm.
So we did celebrate. The only thing my mother wanted was secular Christmas, and that
Yeah.
was the deal. And my
Uh-huh.
grandfather was invited over. I think I was probably in the oven at that point when they first moved to Northumberland Street. The first Christmas they had there, and my grandfather was very hesitant in Christmas tree, that kind of a thing. Oh,
Okay,
he
so the
came
grandfather on your
on
father's
my
side.
father's side.
Okay.
So he came over and got into trimming the tree and did so every year until he passed away. Yeah.
Uh,
So it was very secular. No mangers. It was just like it's with the pagans, what they say,
yeah.
the old with the Christmas tree and that sort and the presents. But
Yeah.
we had Hanukkah too.
Hmm.
But so this path that I found, I think it was pretty much on my own. I suspect that particular grandfather, who was an immigrant from Lithuania, escaped the pogroms as a little boy. I think my psychic abilities told me that I think I got it from him because he came to this country not speaking a word of English, and not only did he go to law school, he ended up pleading some cases at the Supreme Court. And I think in some ways that lawyers have to have that kind of a thing, that intuitive thing to know where to look for the facts. If
Yeah.
do you have a tissue?
Yeah. I've had Mark Anthony on this
Oh,
show,
really?
the psychic lawyer.
The psychic lawyer. Yes, he used to be at Journeys.
That's fresh.
Oh, okay, thanks. I just need to.
Happens. Uh,
Okay.
yeah, he's really something.
And I think my father got it. I think my father got it too, but I always felt that my grandfather passed a month before my 6th birthday, but my memories of him are very, very strong.
Yeah.
And when I think back on it now, I think he was the one. And then I suspect that my mother growing up where she did, she made a number of trips to Lilydale
Yeah, I
herself.
was going to ask you about that. If she grew up in Chautauqua, uh, Lilydale's just down the road. So,
And it's very interesting because I always felt as though she lived the parallel life to Lucille Ball, who lived on the southern end of the lake, because
mm,
they both ended up going to New York to become models.
uh,
And then they both went to the West Coast to get into the movies.
uh,
But before my mother could get into the movies, she met my father and moved back to Pittsburgh. And I thought, and then they both met Mediterranean types
mm.
of men, and they were both born 11 years apart. But I had this psychic thing that said, I think both Lucille Ball and my mother at their respective years each went to Lilydale, and they either heard on the outdoor service or got a reading that, like, because that's a rite of passage for these young ladies
Yeah.
still, I think. And they were both told by mediums, hey, girl, you need to get out of Dodge. You need to go to the big city.
Yeah.
You cannot stay in this small town. Your destiny is going to lead you to the big city and maybe the West Coast. And I really
Yeah.
believe they both heard that, and they both kind of their lives ended up a little differently.
Yeah.
And they were both Leos too.
Okay. So you went to Syracuse for drama.
Yeah.
And was that your mother's influence, or it was just something you felt you needed to do, or how'd that
It was,
happen?
I loved acting. I took dancing lessons as a little kid. I just loved singing and dancing and acting. So I
Mhm.
started at Kent State and I went to Syracuse. And interestingly enough, on my father's side of the family, we do have the old Hollywood stuff because he was first cousin to David O. Selznick.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they ended up not speaking to each other before I was born. So
Oh, that's too bad.
I don't know. After I heard the Shirley Temple story, I don't know. Anyway,
Well,
but I
so,
was always curious about him. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so you got a degree in trauma. Did you do anything with it?
Actually, I went to I lived in New York, and it's kind of a cold world, and I'd had an unfortunate it's sort of like a classic. The agent chased me around the office, and that was kind of I left, and that was very discouraging.
Yeah.
But when I lived in Seattle for a while. I ended up being in Three Penny Opera, and I ended up being having a small part in a movie. So I've
Mhm.
done little bits and pieces, but I I love the process, but that's a very toxic world. And in recent years, with my parents long gone, I realized that my father could have stayed in LA, and with my mother could have gotten into the move. She was about ready to sign with MGM and could have gotten into the movies, and my father could have been an attorney with the cousin that he hated, but they decided to, he decided to come and take over my grandfather. He was getting on in years, take over his practice, and I realized at a very deep level what a really messed up world that was, and that
Yeah.
with the problems that they had, probably would have been a lot worse had they decided to stay in LA instead
Yeah.
of coming back to Pittsburgh. So I realized as part of my spiritual journey that even though they had their flaw, everybody has their flaws, that I thought on some deep level they really kind of knew what they were doing, whether they knew it or not, by not
Yeah.
having us grow up there, and because that is the toxic world, I think.
Yeah.
But I did do some theater stuff afterwards, and I didn't go on to fame and fortune, which wasn't in the cards for me.
Yeah. The cards. So speak to me about tarot and why that's important to you and how you got involved in all of that.
Well, I recommend to people that are developing as mediums and developing their psychic abilities, which is important. I said, learn the tarot and start out by giving those kinds of readings because there's such rich symbolism. And when you put them on the table, they tell a story. They've got the Jewish mysticism of Kabbalah. They've got astrology, all kinds of things that are very, very interesting. Plus, the royal cards with the kings and the queens and the major arcanas they're archetypes of people that come that in the living and those that have passed. And in fact, one of my workshops at the gallery, I will be not pulling cards for that, but knowing them well enough that maybe they will come as part of the symbolism that you to get part of the evidence that you get. And like I would say, my father was a lawyer, so he'd be the king of swords.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had an interesting reading with Christine Frischard at the gallery. And speaking of which, she mentioned to me that you're sort of invested in the success of that gallery, and then that you're I guess you play a part in that.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I feel as though the thing is that with the work that we do and the work that artists do, because a lot of us are artists too, is that it comes out of the right side of the brain. Intuitiveness and creativity are all right side, and art. And I love her concept of art and the metaphysical mixing. And there's always the energy of art that adds to the intuition.
Yeah.
Whether you're looking at the pictures or not, it's like that energy is there. And so ever since she came back, well, I worked with her before, but I thought when she wanted me involved, I thought, yes, that's a good idea because the two work together so well, and that and I believe that we all need to help each other out.
Yeah.
We really do. So I do want to see her make a success of this venture.
So that reminds me that that you do have an artist side to you, and as part of your creative expression. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Okay, I do have the jewelry that I make, and that when you do that, becomes kind of meditative. But the real love that I had was photography, and I did. I've had a few things exhibited in Seattle, and did little bits and pieces of photojournalism for small community publications, and I do miss working in the dark room because it's kind of like being back in the womb, hearing all the whooshing of the water and that sort of thing. But where the intuition comes to play with that is it's like hitting the shutter at that point and capturing that moment that could be like 100th of a second. And it's like you can't. And the interesting thing is when you do readings, whether they're psychic or mediumship, the worst you can do is think. You don't want to think.
Yeah.
And that comes with hitting in the shutter at that moment when you've got your exposure correct, that sort of thing. And to me, I've realized over the years that really did build my intuition quite a bit, is just knowing, like, you don't even think, you just hit it and saying, it's like, that I always think of that fellow, I wish I could remember his name, that shot that photo of Lee Harvey Oswald when he was shot.
Yeah.
There were other photographers that were there, but he's the one that got the shot. Now,
Right.
he didn't have time to frame it nicely, and I've seen the original, so you do see the cropped-in version, but that doesn't take away from the fact that there was a guy that was about ready to block his view. And didn't, and he's
Yeah.
written about that and thinking that he was on the most boring assignment of his life because he
Yeah.
was behind, he was part of the motorcade, and then, okay, they're going to take him through the parking lot. How boring can you get? But no, I think it probably won the Pulitzer. I think it did win the Pulitzer that year. So it's that whole thing, and realizing he just went snap, and he doesn't know, but he was using the intuition that he wasn't even thinking of. So that's what I love so much about it.
Yeah.
There is, even if you are doing something straightforward like journalism or well, I photographed weddings,
Hmm.
that, and that can get, well, you're right. That there are those moments that you
Yeah.
capture, like, this was a thing I did in black and white when in Seattle. I was shooting a wedding, and it was overlooking the sound. It was at some wedding place overlooking the sound, and just when they were taking their vows, these little ducks came in the background,
Uh,
and then they cracked up in the middle of the ceremony, and I caught the moment of them laughing, which would have been so easy to miss. So they're the most mundane. It's really,
mhm.
I think I can relate it spiritually, because sometimes the most mundane things become the most incredible things you could ever imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know you know Robin Esaturo.
Yes.
And uh, in my interview with Robin, she had a couple photographs that she wanted to share with everybody, and she shares those in her book. Uh, have in your photography experience, have you ever run into capturing light or orbs or things
Oh,
that
yes.
and do you recall any of those experiences?
Yes. I think I've caught some. Well, of course, everybody and their mother in Lilydale, they'll go to the stump where they give the
Yeah, right,
messages and
right,
catch the
right.
orbs there. But oh, one time when the Tibetan monks were doing their procession after they dismantled the mandala and they were doing the procession down to the lake,
Hmm.
I caught some
Uh,
incredible orbs there. And sometimes, shooting photos in downtown Pittsburgh where, I've felt the spirit of Bob O'Connor. So he was a strong
mm,
spirit guy, and I've caught his vibes quite a bit. And think around the city county building,
yeah.
you catch some orbs there, and things like going to monuments and that sort of thing. Now, early in my this is funny. Early in my realizing my spiritual journey, I was at that big Lutheran cemetery up on top of, not far from where I live, up on top of Spring Hill. It goes up all the way up to the projects practically. And I was shooting at the cemetery, and I was saying, "One of these things, they're so annoying." I was trying to avoid them, but I couldn't. I had
Yeah.
like a zillion orbs up at that cemetery, and I was thinking, I don't want. And then I talked to people in my community. They said, "Yes, you do want those. You can't
Yeah.
avoid those. Those are the spirits. You are getting those spirits coming out." And I said, "Oh, okay." So it's funny because a lot of photographers that aren't aware of that will try to avoid those. And in
Mhm.
fact, for another photographer, Steve Mellon, who used to shoot for the Post Gazette, or
Mhm.
maybe he still does, he took photos in August. I get goosebumps thinking about this. He took photos in August Wilson's old house, I think just before they renovated it. It was Orb City.
Huh.
It was a lot, and I bet he was saying, "Damn, where are those?" You know what I'm But it was incredible saying, "Holy cow, that guy's spirit is really strong," 'cause those were
Yeah,
orbs. Oh, it was beautiful, orbs all over the place.
yeah. Well, Bob O'Connor's son is now
He's now Corey, yes.
he's the mayor.
He's the mayor now,
Yeah.
yes. I think I've when I used to work banquets, I used to see him and his mother after Bob passed. I used to see them after it, think they'd be going to a wedding, and in the downtime, I would chat with them. Very, very nice people. She was a
Yeah.
and that's another thing is I was at a Labor Day parade for our union, and just while we were getting started at the old Mellon Arena, I walked up and said, "Oh, hi, how are you?" I shook hands with her, and the grief coming through
Mm,
was, and this was a few years after he passed.
yeah.
I could feel like, whoa, that is heavy duty grief coming from this woman.
Okay. Now you just used the term our union. What union is that? And
Unite Here, Local 57. I was a member of Local 8 in Seattle for that, and Local 57 in Pittsburgh when I used to be an on-call banquet server at hotels.
so is that for the SEIU?
No, they tried to take us over, but we didn't let them.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. They're pretty
That's
big.
going back 15, 16 years ago, but that was a big thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so that I did that a number of years because it was my photography and all this other stuff. I wanted to not be tied down to a full time.
Yeah. Okay. So if somebody wants to reach you and have a sit, uh, how do they connect with you?
Well, they can connect a number of ways. My phone number's on my website, and I'm on Facebook, and I'm on, let's see, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, where my website is, and the phone number is there, and they can email me through my website at psychicsara.net. Very easy
Okay.
to remember. And I'm doing a new thing, which is email or Facebook message one question readings where, they pay, it's like $25 for one and question. And then I do a quick tarot spread, type out the answer and photograph the spread, and they get it back in Messenger. So if they have a one pressing thing, they just want to have
Yeah.
something on paper. I just started doing that.
Yeah. That sounds, I don't know. That just sounds so quick and easy.
Yeah, it's just for quick and easy questions. That's the whole thing, or to what they're possible. The whole philosophy is that we don't exactly give them the answers. We give them what we're perceiving that they don't, so they can make an informed choice, because free will is a very
Yeah.
important part of what we do.
Right. Okay. Well, we have come to the end of our time together for now.
Oh, good.
Uh, I did want to get in the fact that there's a group of you who are getting prepared to restart a spiritualist church in the Pittsburgh area.
Yes, that's where Robin comes in.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's going to be once or twice a month at the gallery, because the closest one is up in Newcastle, and actually the woman who mentored Karen Heasley, she might be another one for you to interview. Is the one that Janet No Havoc, the ex nun from New Jersey, helped her get started, and it's very good. But that's a long drive. I mean,
Right.
I recommend it if you're in the area, but we need to have one, since our other one kind of went bye-bye.
Yeah.
COVID, kind of, that was the nail in the coffin, so to speak.
Yeah. So when do you think that will get started?
I'm hoping, see, Christine has to go to Europe to see family.
Mhm.
She's going to be back a little past the middle of February. So I'm hoping that we can get started with that, because she's going to be leaving pretty soon.
Yeah.
In the next, I don't know,
The
the end of
17th.
the 17th. Wow.
Yeah.
So I think she's going to be keeping in touch with Robin, and I will too, because we're thinking of doing it instead of those morning things, like sort of like more like maybe midday or mid-afternoon, more civilized time, more civilized time, because
Yeah.
that's even with Sight Night, and that wasn't the same. They were good, but it's not the same as having a
Right.
service.
So maybe by March, you're
I'm
thinking?
hoping. I'm
Yeah.
hoping that Yeah, that would sound like that would be happening, and we'll decide whether we want it once a month
Yeah.
or twice a month. Because I have a friend in Buffalo who she does hers once a month, and then she gets like a slow turnout is 75 people. So
Uh-huh.
sometimes that having fewer of them gets more people to
Yeah.
them.
Okay. So, just for the audience, Christine Furchard's gallery is at 5005 Penn Avenue in the Garfield area of Pittsburgh.
And when you see the bicycle rack, you know you're there
Yeah.
because it's next to the bike repair shop.
So, a lot of people who are listening to this show are not in Pittsburgh, so that will not mean anything to you, but those local folks, check it out. Okay. At this point, I always ask the guest to leave the audience with a few words of wisdom.
Okay, I would say that we're going through some difficult times now, and this may be part of what I do on YouTube. We're going through some difficult times, but we've been here before. Look at your history of this kind of low vibration thing. It's happened in the late 1930s and into the 1940s, and we got through that, and we're going to get through this. So, while it's very important for us to get involved, it's very important that we pull back from the social media a little bit and, and enjoy ourselves, meditate. But these tough times will not last forever.
So there's hope at the end
There
of all
is
this.
there is always hope. There's always hope because I think the thing is that people are more aware and they're looking at that history from 80 plus years ago
Mhm.
that they really weren't back in the 1930s. So we
Yeah,
have to remember that we have that going for us. So
yeah,
it's like take care of yourselves and take care of each other and know that we're going to get through this.
yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Well, audience, as always, take what you've heard and whatever resonates with you, incorporate it into your life, and put the rest on the shelf until you're ready to deal with it. Until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.